from a marketing perspective, it's our job to have our eyes wide open to new opportunities, right? And to be looking for new channels, to find new customers, and to follow that consumer behavior wherever it might be. But I do think that there are times where we maybe get a little ahead of our skis potentially related to testing new emerging marketing channels or putting too much into it, too much stock or faith into knowing that that channel is going to be effective.
Hello, and welcome to The Marketing Architects, a research-first podcast dedicated to answering your toughest marketing questions. I'm Elena Hingle. I run the marketing team here at Marketing Architects, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Angela Voss, our CEO, and Rob DeMars, our Chief Product Architect. We're back with our thoughts on some recent marketing news, always trying to root our opinions in data, research, and what drives business results. Today, we're going to cover a recent report from eMarketer that has stirred up some conversation in the marketing community, and that report is called U.S. Time Spent with Media Forecast. We're going to cover the headlines of the report, which include an imbalance of where consumers spend their time and where brands invest their marketing dollars, and chat about new or emerging marketing channels in general. What are the emerging marketing channels you should keep your eye on? What are the challenges you face when investing in these channels, and how should you think about testing them? But first, let's start with the eMarketer report. I first heard about this report when eMarketer covered it on their Behind the Numbers podcast. So I'm going to summarize the takeaways from that podcast since the entire report is behind their insider intelligence paywall, which we have access to at our agency, but some of our listeners might not. This report looks at the most interesting imbalances between consumer behavior and media investment. eMarketer has always tracked time spent with media. So that is, where do people spend their minutes and hours with different types of media like social, audio, and TV? And they've also tracked where advertisers spend their dollars by media type. So basically, combining these lets us see how many ad dollars are put against people's time. And this is the first time that eMarketer has combined this data in this particular way. And there are a lot of surprising insights here. The biggest one, according to eMarketer, is that advertisers have abandoned traditional media a lot faster than people have. So the amount of money going to digital media is significantly higher than the amount of time consumers spend there. To be exact, people spend 60% of their time with digital media, but marketers spend 75% of their ad dollars there. Another interesting discrepancy is that 24% of our time is spent watching linear TV, but only 17% of ad dollars go there.
But aren't we, let's face it, we're kind of fanboys and fangirls of the boob tube. So, I just watched me some Below Deck last night. Fantastic. Little dumber for it. But I do want to clarify something, or at least challenge some of the assumptions on here on why people might still be choosing digital over TV. One, the barrier to entry into television is more significant than digital, right? If you just think of the cost of even just producing the material to run, let alone buying the media time for it. And digital still has a bit of an advantage in justifying the overall ROI. There's more transparency, right? Targeting is also more precise, so you can understand why your audience is there just to get into television. There's some pretty strong considerations there.
Well, a lot of businesses don't make it. Most don't, right? So they start in digital. They never even make it to television.
Right.
Or, other top of funnel channels. So yeah, there's a little bias there.
I don't know, Rob, if I would agree there's more transparency in digital, but it's probably easier to
perceived
transparency. But eMarketer does talk about that in the podcast, that these stats, I think there are takeaways marketers can learn from this. However, there is a reason why more marketers invest in digital, more are able to lower barrier to entry, easier to target, easier to measure.
Maybe a little more transparent.
I disagree with that.
Agree to disagree.
I just like that it push your buttons. So
yeah, well, consider them pushed. So let's talk about my favorite totally transparent platform, which would be Meta. So Meta, which includes Instagram and Facebook, that platform, that won for the largest discrepancy between the amount of time spent on Meta platforms and the advertising investment there. So time spent on Meta by consumers daily is 7.6%. However, Meta draws in 20% of all digital ad spending and 75% of all social ad spending. So there's a massive difference between the time that consumers spend with Meta and what Meta draws in from advertisers. Other platforms like YouTube, Hulu, TikTok, and Snapchat see the opposite. So time spent is a bit higher on those platforms than ad spending. And YouTube and Meta actually have a similar time spent to one another, but Meta takes 20% of that digital ad spending, while YouTube takes less than 6%.
Well, and I feel like this speaks to the panic, right, that marketers have felt over privacy updates. Meta, primarily Facebook, Instagram, just have dominated digital advertising due to, user targeting capabilities. And then the privacy regulation drastically reduced advertisers' access to that detailed user data on those platforms. And as a result, ad campaigns became less effective, costs rose, and it really challenged the core of Meta's advertising model, forcing advertisers to adapt. So I would expect to see that number start to right size to some degree in 2024 and beyond.
Well, and you're right. I remember when those iOS changes came out, and a lot of D2C brands who are very dependent on Facebook were hit pretty hard by it. And I was even listening to something last week about Facebook's MMM model. And some people were wondering did they release that in response to some of these privacy changes, looking for ways to prove the value of Facebook ad spend for marketers if they're not able to track as well. It's interesting to see that even Facebook is leaning into those long-term measurement methods. They don't even know their MMM model gives credit to other channels. And I know that we use it a bit, and it does give a lot of credit to TV. We found that it doesn't favor Facebook, but in their mind, it's worth it to put out this free MMM model because they've lost so much evidence of how their platform works.
Right.
Well, let's move into CTV because I thought that was an interesting part of the report. People are spending 25% of their digital media time per day watching streaming or CTV, but brands invest less than 10% of their ad dollars there.
Wow.
Don't you think that cost has to be a big factor here? I mean, I think when we think back to 2019, 2020, I remember hearing and reading like stated objectives by major streaming players in the space with the goal being have half the inventory available and sell it for 3 times the cost. And that was a comparison to linear. So when you think about the cost comparatives of the digital space and the CTV space, despite the costs that have risen in digital, CTV still has a ways to go to appeal to a wider set of marketers. And of course, we also have to consider that a significant portion of the streaming environment is subscription-based with no ad dollars. So, of course, that works against those numbers too. But ad-supported platforms and free ad-supported TV is growing every day. And it's going to be necessary for content publishers to reach profitability.
Right. I think proof of that too, Ange, is the CPMs that Netflix went out of the gate with.
Yes.
Right. I think the streamers are all trying to figure out what is the business model. And Netflix, now they've since lowered their CPMs, but I don't know if this strategy of we're going to, charge 10 times as much as a linear CPM for their inventory. I don't know how that's going to pan out, but it does seem like platforms are adding more ads. We know consumers are open to ads, especially as all these costs of these different streaming platforms starts to add up to more than a cable subscription. All of a sudden, cable's looking pretty good from a consumer standpoint.
Right.
Yeah, it's a different perspective.
I thought some of the eMarketer stuff on audio was interesting too. I don't remember the stats on it, but that was pretty interesting. Do you remember those numbers, Elena?
Oh my goodness. Yes. Sorry, Rob. I forgot our favorite channel. Let's talk about audio because that was another category that eMarketer reported on. And this stat I thought was really interesting. Audio listeners actually spend more time with audio than on social networks. Those are, to be clear, those are people that listen to audio. That's not just all people, but people that like audio, like us, tend to spend more time with audio than social. But those ad dollars are really not matching up. We spend more than 11% of our daily media time with digital audio, nearly the same amount of time with radio, but audio gets just 5% of ad spending.
Yeah, that blew my mind. I guess, obviously, we're big podcast consumers, but the fact that it was actually that high. But we have a long history in audio. Radio was a core to our business years ago, and it became harder and harder for us to measure. I mean, when you look at, especially in the D2C space, it used to be you'd use an 800 number. It was a great proxy for measurement. Now consumers don't want to dial 800 numbers, and you can't put a QR code in a radio spot. I mean, I've tried. It doesn't work. And podcasts, they almost have a completely different challenge because they're just so fragmented. So yeah, audio is not going anywhere, but how we consume it just continues to change, and how advertisers can use it will probably have to change with it.
It'll be interesting to see, because you've got, the Apple CarPlay is more and more getting into every car on the road. And will the technology behind radio listenership also start to uncover fingerprinting like technology that could potentially help with usability with your phone and performance measurement and things like that? I don't know. It could go one of two ways.
The barrier to entry to becoming a broadcaster, though, is so much lower, right? So that's just with
sure.
all of those options, how do you gain a mass enough audience to make it meaningful?
Yeah. What's funny, though, is there has been an explosion of audio, but it's become harder to monetize it. If you think about, you talk about radio and how it's become harder to measure, but then also looking at podcasts, Spotify has poured so much money into podcasts, and they're still struggling with how to monetize it. I know that podcast advertisers, it's not always easy to measure because people can so easily skip through podcast ads, unlike radio, where sometimes you're more forced to sit and listen to that commercial break. So obviously it's an exciting space, but I'm not super surprised that there's this mismatch of ad dollars to listenership. Now that we've shared some of those key findings from the report, I wanted to pivot to the topic of emerging marketing channels. As I was thinking about this difference between time spent and advertising dollars, I noticed that some of the largest discrepancies take place when a channel is new, or what we would call emerging. And we define an emerging marketing channel as a relatively new or evolving platform, medium, or method. It might leverage a new technology, a change in consumer behavior, or a shift in communication to reach a target customer in a new way. And there are a lot of examples of these channels, and some examples were mentioned in this report, like CTV, digital audio. TikTok would be an emerging channel. I'd consider most social platforms to still be somewhat emerging as well, but other emerging marketing channels could even include things like influencer marketing, AR and VR advertising, voice search optimization, or even, I'm honestly not quite sure what this is, blockchain marketing.
Right. I think it's going to be super interesting. I mean, you look at things like ChatGPT, right? No monetization model behind them. And yet that's replacing search, right? You go in and you do your prompt, and what's that going to look like in the future? And I'm waiting for the day that I ask Bard to, give me a book summary on The Great Gatsby. And afterwards it replies, "This summary of The Great Gatsby was brought to you by Ralph Lauren. Hey, old sport, wouldn't you look great in a polo?" Just like custom on-demand ads based on your prompts. And
Rob, I'm glad you included ChatGPT or just these AI new search tools. I should have said that. That's a great example of a lot of marketers sitting around wondering, what are we going to do how do you approach a channel like that, other than just typing in your brand name a million times to try to train it on your brand? Right. That's definitely something new that marketers are having to deal with. TV is the most powerful marketing channel. It's first in effectiveness, leads for trust, and is number one in driving emotion. But it's also expensive, difficult to scale, and hard to measure. So we flipped the traditional agency model on its head and created all-inclusive TV. You get one bill for media. We cover everything else you need to succeed. So say goodbye to hourly agency fees and say hello to making TV work harder than ever. Visit marketingarchitects.com to learn more. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how to test and invest in these channels, because the eMarketer report, it did point out that time spent with some of these emerging channels is rising much faster than advertising spend. But I think we might say this is a good thing, right, Andrew? Talked a little bit about that, but many of these channels, they're probably not ready for those equal advertising investments yet.
Yeah, I think, from a marketing perspective, it's our job to have our eyes wide open to new opportunities, right? And to be looking for new channels, to find new customers, and to follow that consumer behavior wherever it might be. But I do think that there are times where we maybe get a little ahead of our skis potentially related to testing new emerging marketing channels or putting too much into it, too much stock or faith into knowing that that channel is going to be effective for them. I think that first and foremost, do we have clarity on what we're trying to do? What's the goal with this new channel, whether it be boosting brand visibility or driving sales? Having that clear objective is really the North Star. And then budget wisely. Allocate a small portion initially for these new channels to minimize risk, but to get those insights that you're going to need, data is going to be your ally, right? Use metrics from current platforms to gauge potential success in new spaces. That's going to take vigilant activity, tracking performance and key indicators to refine your approach. But emerging channels evolve really fast. I mean, if you think about just using CTV as an example, the fragmentation of the space and just trying to stay abreast of how it all works can very often create challenges in really understanding what's happening. Are you really getting incremental lift to your site, or actually are you measuring the lift that would have already occurred is one, approach that we've seen trip marketers up. And then I think lastly, innovation is great, but we need to evaluate for long-term potential. Is the channel just a trend, or is it a valuable addition to the marketing mix? After your testing, if the ROI looks promising and it aligns with your brand's mission, then go bigger, but start small.
I think that's great advice to first start with the goal in mind, and second, budget wisely, because I know that even for television, we always try to look at what's the minimum amount you have to spend to know if it worked. Nobody wants to overspend on a test, but I know we had Matt on here a while ago, and he's our head of analytics. He always talks about the worst thing that can happen during a TV test is to spend a bunch of money and not know if it worked.
Yeah. You often think, well, the worst thing that can happen is to, have it fail. But actually the worst thing is to not know.
Speaking of TV, I wanted to circle back on CTV in particular as one of those emerging marketing channels we've talked about today, because as a TV agency, that's where our expertise lies. And I think that this evolution of marketers testing and investing in CTV is a really great story of how an emerging marketing channel can capture marketers' attention in both good and bad ways. So, Ange, what has CTV coming to prominence as a marketing channel? I don't know what to call this other than a complete journey been like for marketers.
I think when we think about CTV, it was so long awaited by marketers craving those benefits of top of funnel channels like traditional TV, but with that digital like environment. Streaming grew so fast, right? I remember in 2020, it was just all the craze. And now I think we're seeing that marketers are having to come to grips with some of the realities of CTV that are painful. They're feeling a bit like broken promises of the space, especially for performance marketers. And that's really rooted in cost. Streaming inventory is priced at a premium. We talked about that before. Netflix rolling out right at $60 per thousand. So, and then you've got excessive tech and admin fees piling up. Shared accounts and dual viewing often means marketers are overpaying to reach the wrong person. And the reality of targeting capabilities that we were all excited about is that the more targeting layers you add, the higher the price goes. And so where we see complexity, we also see opportunity, which is what led to the creation of our proprietary streaming platform. Annika is our proprietary AI-based tech platform that's been primary in driving efficient reach for our brands in the linear space since 2018. And now we are rolling out Annika Streaming, which really represents the first opportunistic rate marketplace in streaming television and is really set out to kind of revolutionize that space by eliminating those unnecessary fees and middlemen and waste, which in turn allows marketers to fully realize the full benefits that streaming TV had promised. So it's a super exciting time.
That was a very impressive description, Angela.
Oh, thanks, Rob. We're excited about it.
Yeah. I think too, streaming, it reminds me of, you just talked about when you're looking at an emerging marketing channel, what should you evaluate? One of the things you said is that long-term potential. And I think the last few years, we've maybe felt a little bit like we're taking crazy pills because everyone's talking about how wonderful streaming is. It's the future, da da da. But when we talk to marketers, a lot of them did tests on streaming and they just didn't see the return. And if you think about how long streaming's been out, we have waited a long time to release our own solution, but that's because the space just hasn't been ready. It's been so emerging. There hasn't been enough ad inventory. They're trying to figure out measurement standards. So it's taken a while to get here, but I think it's one of those channels that we'd say is now finally making its way into a channel that everyone should have part of their marketing mix. But these emerging channels, they can be exciting, but they're not always quite ready for long-term, consistent marketing investments.
I think that's a really good way to put it.
And this week, we are officially launching Annika Streaming to brands outside of our core client list. So if you want to learn more about that, you can go to marketingarchitects.com/streaming. We're even offering some free CTV pilot projections for a short time. So if you're a marketer and you're curious about what a streaming TV campaign might be able to deliver for your brand in particular, you can schedule some time to chat with our team there. So again, that's marketingarchitects.com/streaming if you're interested in learning more about that emerging marketing channel. So to kind of wrap us up here, we started by talking about that eMarketer report. How does time spent differ from advertising investments in media? Some of those key takeaways were advertisers are not investing as much in traditional media compared to digital media when you look at time spent by consumers there, but sometimes that makes sense. We talked about how a lot of smaller brands start on digital. Digital, you can invest less to see if it works. There's more targeting, tracking. So we're not saying you need to rethink your whole ad spend, but that is interesting to see that advertising dollars are leaving traditional media faster than viewers are. And we also talked about how you might think about investing in emerging marketing channels and even covered a solution we have for an emerging marketing channel like CTV. That's it for this episode of The Marketing Architects. You can connect with us on LinkedIn, and if you find our show valuable, please leave us a rating and review. And if you want to know what the research says about some recent news, you can contact us at marketingarchitects.com/podcast. Now go forth and build great marketing.
Did you just say Ralph Lauren?
Yeah, I was going to say, what?
Is that Ralph? I've always said Ralph Lauren. Oh, you know, the polo guy.
Yeah, Ralph Lauren.
Ralph Lauren. That's the only brand I could think of that'd go with Great Gatsby. So sorry.
That goes in the Rob book, Rob.
Wow. I'm sorry. I got to recover from that.